August 1971, Stanford University basement. 24 college students, screened for psychological stability. Normal, healthy, good kids. They volunteered for a 2-week study on prison behavior. Half were randomly assigned to be guards, half were prisoners. Within hours, the guards became cruel. Within days, the prisoners broke down. By day 6, the experiment was terminated. Not because of the data, because the psychologist running it realized he'd created actual torture. The guards hadn't been instructed to be violent. They weren't sadists. They were ordinary college students given uniforms, authority, and a role to play. And that was enough. Good people turned cruel in less than a week. Why? Because evil doesn't require monsters. It requires permission, structure, a role that says, this is acceptable here. And once that role is assigned, ordinary people do horrific things, not despite their morality, because of how morality actually works. The Stanford prison experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. It ended in 6 days because it became too real. Philip Zimbardo, the psychologist running the study, transformed a basement hallway into a mock prison. Students were arrested at their homes by real police, booked, stripped, deloused, given numbers instead of names. The guards received uniforms, sunglasses to avoid eye contact, batons, and minimal instructions. Maintain order. No one told them to be cruel, but cruelty emerged anyway. Guards forced prisoners to do push-ups, made them clean toilets with their bare hands, woke them in the middle of the night for arbitrary head counts, put them in solitary confinement, a closet, for hours. One guard later admitted he modeled his behavior after a character from a prison movie. He was performing, playing a role, and the role demanded cruelty. The prisoners? They stopped resisting, stopped asserting that this was just an experiment. They internalized their roles, became submissive, broke down emotionally. One had to be released after 36 hours due to acute psychological distress. They forgot it was fake. The roles became real. Zimbardo himself forgot. He became the prison superintendent, focused on maintaining the experiment, ignored the suffering, until his girlfriend, a psychologist, visited and asked, "What are you doing to these boys?" That question snapped him back. He terminated the study, but the damage was done. 24 normal students, 1 week, total transformation. Guards became sadists, prisoners became victims, the psychologist became complicit. Not because they were evil, because the situation made evil easy. A decade earlier, Stanley Milgram had already discovered this. His experiment was simpler: a teacher, a learner, an authority figure in a lab coat. The teacher's job: punish the learner for wrong answers with electric shocks. 15 volts, 30, 75, all the way up to 450. The learner screamed, begged to be let out. Eventually went silent. The teacher wanted to stop, but the authority figure said, "The experiment requires that you continue." And 65% did. All the way. Lethal voltage. There was no real shock. The learner was an actor. But the teachers didn't know that. They believed they were hurting someone, and they did it anyway. Why? Milgram identified several factors: authority, the lab coat, the institutional setting, the incremental escalation. Small shocks normalized to bigger ones. The diffusion of responsibility. The authority figure would take the blame. But underneath all of it, obedience, the deeply ingrained human tendency to defer to authority and follow orders. Not because the orders make sense, because disobeying feels harder than complying. Here's what's happening psychologically. When you're placed in a role, guard, teacher, employee, soldier, your identity shifts. You stop being an individual with personal moral responsibility. You become a representative of the role. The role has rules, expectations, norms, and those norms override your personal morality. This is called moral disengagement. the psychological process by which people convince themselves that ethical standards don't apply in certain situations. It happens through several mechanisms. First, euphemistic labeling. You don't call it torture. You call it enhanced interrogation. You don't call it killing. You call it neutralizing targets. Language creates distance between action and consequence. Second, displacement of responsibility. You're not responsible. You're following orders. The authority figure made the decision. You're just executing it. Third, diffusion of responsibility. You're not the only one doing it. Everyone else is complying too. So it must be okay. The group shares the blame, which means no individual carries it. Fourth, dehumanization. The victim isn't fully human. They're a prisoner, a number, the enemy. Once dehumanized, normal empathy doesn't apply. And fifth, moral justification. This serves a higher purpose: national security, scientific progress, maintaining order. The ends justify the means. Each mechanism makes it easier to act unethically while maintaining a self-image as a good person. You're not doing something wrong. You're doing your job. And neuroscience confirms this. Brain imaging studies show that when people obey authority, activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for moral reasoning and self-control, decreases. You're not thinking. You're executing. The authority figure is thinking for you. Your brain literally outsources moral judgment. This is why war crimes happen. Not because soldiers are psychopaths, but because military structure, uniforms, roles, and chain of command create conditions where ordinary people commit atrocities. My Lai massacre, Abu Ghraib, Srebrenica. Every war crime in history follows the same pattern. Normal people, placed in roles, given authority, dehumanizing language, orders from above, and suddenly mass murder becomes possible. But you don't need war. You don't need prisons. This happens everywhere. Corporate scandals, Enron, Theranos, Wells Fargo. Employees knew the company was committing fraud, but they complied because their role was to hit targets, follow procedures, not question leadership. Diffusion of responsibility. Everyone else was doing it. Displacement of responsibility. Management approved it. Euphemistic labeling. It's not fraud. It's aggressive accounting. Same mechanisms. Different context. Online mobs. Social media makes moral disengagement frictionless. You're not harassing a person. You're holding someone accountable. You're not part of a mob. You're one voice among thousands. You're not destroying someone's life. You're spreading awareness. Dehumanization happens instantly. The target becomes a symbol, a representation of everything wrong, not a complex human being, a villain in a narrative. And because everyone's doing it, diffusion of responsibility, no individual feels accountable for the collective harm. Political violence. Extremism on all sides follows this pattern. You're not committing violence. You're defending your community. The other side isn't human. They're a threat. And your leaders say it's justified, necessary, heroic even. Same psychology, same mechanisms, different ideology. The most dangerous thing, this doesn't require hatred. Hatred is loud, obvious, easy to recognize and resist. But obedience is quiet, comfortable, socially rewarded. You don't have to hate the prisoner to follow the guard's orders. You don't have to hate the learner to press the shock button. You don't have to hate your coworkers to participate in corporate fraud. You just have to obey. And obedience feels safe, normal. Right. That's why comfort is more dangerous than hatred. Hatred is rare and extreme. Comfort is universal. Most people won't commit atrocities out of malice, but they will commit them out of compliance, out of not wanting to cause problems, out of trust in authority, out of belief that someone else is responsible. The Holocaust didn't happen because millions of Germans were sadists. It happened because millions of ordinary people followed orders, filled out paperwork, ran trains, guarded camps, looked away. Each individual action seemed small, bureaucratic, just doing a job. But collectively, genocide. Hannah Arendt called it the banality of evil. Evil doesn't announce itself dramatically. It appears as routine, as procedure, as obedience. So what do you do? How do you resist when the situation, the role, the authority all say, comply? First, recognize the mechanism. You're not immune. Good intentions don't protect you. Moral people commit immoral acts when placed in immoral systems. Second, question the role. You're not just a guard, not just an employee, not just following orders. You're a person with moral agency. The role doesn't erase that. Third, refuse diffusion. You are responsible, not the group, not the authority. You. If you participate, you're complicit. Full stop. Fourth, maintain outside identity. Don't let the role consume you. Stay connected to people and values outside the system. They provide perspective when the system normalizes atrocity. Fifth, speak up early. Evil escalates gradually. The first small compromise makes the next one easier. If you resist early, you prevent the slide. And finally, accept the cost. Disobedience has consequences. Social rejection, job loss, punishment. But obedience has consequences too. Complicity, guilt, the knowledge that you enabled harm. Choose which consequences you can live with. The guards at Stanford weren't monsters. The teachers in Milgram's study weren't sadists. The soldiers who commit war crimes weren't born evil. They were ordinary people placed in situations where evil became easy and obedience became automatic. And you? You're not different. You're not immune. Under the right conditions, authority, role, social pressure, incremental escalation, you could do horrific things too. Not because you're bad, because you're human. And humans obey. But humans also choose. And that choice, the decision to think instead of comply, to resist instead of obey, to accept discomfort instead of participate in evil, is where morality actually lives. Not in your intentions, in your actions, especially when those actions cost something. Evil doesn't start with monsters. It starts with obedience. And resistance doesn't start with heroes. It starts with ordinary people saying a no. I won't comply. Not this time. That's all it takes. One person refusing, breaking the spell, reminding everyone else that they have a choice. You are not your role. You are not your orders. You are not the system. You're a person with moral agency, with responsibility. And that responsibility doesn't disappear just because someone in authority says it does. Evil thrives on obedience. Resistance begins with refusal. Not dramatic, not heroic, just honest. No, I won't do this. That's where it starts. That's where it always starts. With someone remembering they're human and acting like it.